Okay, just before we begin, one thing that I had to point out to my neighbors, if you can't find sand, if you can't find ice melting, and you have a fireplace ashes make a great substance to put on top of ice, and you get terrific traction on it. And since it's dark, it absorbs the sun's heat and melts. So don't throw them away, spread them on the ice. Okay, today we start with Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. This is part of the Sermon on the Mount. This is the Beatitudes, the blessed are, a saying we all have heard about. So a lot of what I'm going to give you today comes from a biblical commentary by William Barclay, who is a noted Scottish theologian in the 50s and 60s. His books were last revised in 1975. I use this pretty much every time I preach to put everything in context. Normally I might get 5, 8, 10 pages on a reading. Today I got 35. To do the entire Sermon on the Mount, which takes Matthews 5, 6, and 7, it's 135 pages. There's a lot of meat in these readings. And one of the things I like about Barclay, if there's a difficult word, or if there was a word that's in the Bible that means something different today than it did back then, he goes into the weeds. He goes into the Greek, the Aramaic, and the Jewish language to try to bring it forward into something we can understand in the 19th century. And that's what we are doing. So we've got these 3 books, and we have short reading today. Remember, there's no notes. Nobody has it on video. So 3 full books of the Bible in one sitting is the way Matthew has it. The disciples are up there with him getting 3 books of instructions. So how does it get recorded? How do we know that this was true? How do we know this happened? Because there's no way you listen to all 3 books. JR stands up here for an hour, boring us to death. None of us are going to remember a quarter of it, let alone the whole thing. Well, the answer comes from the Gospel according to Luke. Because see, in Luke, there's 105 verses in the Sermon on the Mount, if you go from 5 through 7. In Matthew, you only get 29 in any one place. The rest of the Sermon on the Mount is scattered throughout the book of Luke, which is probably more accurately the way it all came together, that he would give little lessons to his disciples as things went on, as opposed to one condensed version. So it's one thing if we sit here and read it, digest it, discuss it, ponder it. It's another for these guys, fishermen, mind you. These aren't the elite. These aren't the religious leaders. These are fishermen. They're not going to listen to 105 verses and remember it. So Luke probably has it right that it happened over time. So as I mentioned earlier, he's just starting his ministry. He had just recruited his people. He had his inner circle. He had all these people following him. And he finally said, I better teach these guys a thing or two, because all these people are following and they're going to be required to talk. So in Matthew's introductory sentence, we get 3 clues of what's going on here. First clue, Jesus sat down to teach. Back then, when the rabbi wanted to teach, he sat down. He didn't stand up, he sat, which means everybody sit down and listen. Second thing, in this translation it says he spoke. Other translations say he opened his mouth. Well, this is one of those instances where it's difficult to translate Greek into English. In Greek, open the mouth is a phrase, it's an expression, it's a signal that what I'm about to say is solemn and grave and very important. And it was something to let you know the teacher was about to empty his mind, his heart, and his soul into what he was about to say. Last clue, he says, taught them saying. There's two ways the Greeks have that phrase. One is, this is it. This is it. I'm telling you right now, and you're done, and you can leave. The second interpretation in the Greek is, what I'm telling you now is to be repeated over and over. You have to keep doing it continuously and habitually. This will be your life going forward. It's not a one and done. You just don't listen. You have to keep doing it. So let's explore these Beatitudes. And we get into a problem right up front. So we're going to take the biblical language, which was from the 16th century, go back into the Greek, the Aramaic, and the Hebrew, and then Barclay brings us back into 19th century English so we might have a better understanding of what they mean. And you'll see how that works. Because as we know, in the Greek language, there are 7 words for the different types of love. English, being the smart people we are, have 1 word and 7 definitions. Greeks have 1 word, we have 1 word called sin. Greeks have numerous different words meaning different kinds of sin. So let's start off with the first. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Right up front, we have our first problem. The word "are" doesn't exist in Aramaic or Hebrew. If you go back and look at what they most likely were saying, the better translation would be, "O blessedness of the poor in spirit." The "are" didn't exist, so "blessed are the poor" was something they invented when they wrote the King James Bible. It's not a promise of future happiness, but it means blessedness that exists now, here and now. Not will happen, but is happening. The Christian doesn't wait for it to happen. They are in it at the moment. So you could redo this one to say, oh, blessed of the man who has realized his own utter helplessness and who put his whole trust in God, for thus alone can he render to God that perfect obedience which will make him a citizen of heaven. Now, I left out a couple of pages of when Barclay gets into the grammar of the Greek versus the English, because I'm not an English teacher, and I'm afraid somebody out there is, and I would butcher it and get criticized for it. Second, a lot of these are simple. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Well, it's a little bit different when we bring it into modern. Blessed are those who desperately sorrow for the sorrow and suffering of the world. Blessed is the man who is desperately sorry for his own sin and his own unworthiness. So he takes the who are mourned and brings it into more of a personal issue for us. Oh, blessed the man whose heart is broken for the world's suffering and for his own sin. For out of that sorrow he will find the joy of God, is how Barclay brings that one forward. And here's my favorite. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This is a great one. How many of us aspire to be labeled weak, to be labeled meek, as we usually understand that word? How many of you had your parents say, I want you to grow up to be meek? Show of hands, anybody? How many of you parents are telling your children, grow up and be meek? Well, here we go. One word in the English language, but there's 3 Greek interpretations of that concept. One is, where am I? Well, first off, if you look in Webster's, there's 3 definitions for meek. Once again, Greek have 3 words. We have one with 3 definitions. The definition we most likely have in our mind when we talk about meek is too submissive, easily imposed upon, spineless, and spiritless. This is what comes to mind for most of us when we hear the word meek. The second one in Webster, it's a little closer, patient and mild, not inclined to anger or resentment. Third definition is gentle or kind. So when you see the word meek, you go, But when you come across something like that going through the Bible, and I forgot to bring my copy with me, go to the dictionary. So that expression doesn't mean anything, and then you go to the one, you look up the different definitions, says, that makes more sense. Otherwise, most people just look at it and say, well, I don't know what that means, I don't care, it means nothing to me. Sometimes a dictionary helps, even though a lot of the kids probably have never seen one. I know when our nephews stayed with us many, many years ago when we were in school, they were trying to figure out how to spell a word. We said, go use the dictionary. And they were like, what's that? We had to go out and buy one because we didn't have one. Nowadays, they look it up on their phone. But something like that, like the word meek, can solve a whole lot of problems when you're reading and trying to understand. So if we plug in the Greek possible translations, perhaps it sounds better like this. Oh, blessed is the man who is always angry at the right time, never angry at the wrong time. Or, blessed is the man who has every instinct, every impulse and passion under control, because he himself is God-controlled. Or, blessed is the man who has the humility to realize his own ignorance, his own weakness, his own need, that he understands that without God he can do nothing, for such a man is a king among men. That's the one that's closest to what it would mean in Greek if we were Greek and the guy was speaking in Greek. And keep in mind, one of the most famous meek persons in the Bible, and he's described as being very meek, was Moses. In the book of Numbers, he's described as being very meek. Yet he was no pushover. He didn't take it from anybody. That's why that one was my favorite one. Fourth one, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Hunger and thirst. Back then, when Jesus was speaking, that was a very real day-to-day problem. Not having food, very common. People were hungry all the time. Not having a drink of water. No bottled water. If you were traveling through the desert, sometimes you made a mistake and had no water, and you can die of thirst. So he's describing someone who's starving for food and someone who will die unless he drinks. So in today's reality, this one is more a question of what is your desire? What is your level of desire to seek goodness? And this one is like 2 or 3 pages of Greek grammar, passive versus active versus all of that. So we'll skip to the punchline. Blessed is the man who longs for total righteousness, as a starving man longs for food, and a man perishing thirsts long for water. For that man will be truly satisfied. That's the level of desire he's trying to tell people when you're seeking righteousness. It's that strong. Blessed, next one is, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. On its face, a great expression. There's not much you really need to do with this one. I mean, they're very close together. English and Greek are close. But that's not good enough for Barclay. He's really got to go in the weeds in this one and go back to the Hebrew. He just can't leave it alone. And in Hebrew, there's this whole expression, there's no single word for mercy. It doesn't mean what we think back in Hebrew. It meant back then, the concept was the ability to get right inside your neighbor's skin until you can see things the way he sees them through his eyes, to think the things that he thinks with his mind. And then we will be able to see his point of view. And then we can experience what he's going through. And if we make that effort, it makes a great difference. First, it will save you from being kind in the wrong way. Remember Mary and Martha when Jesus came to supper? One sat at his feet listening, the other one scuttled in the kitchen. One was being kind in the wrong way by spending time in the kitchen and not listening. If we do this, it will make forgiveness and tolerance of our neighbors so much easier. But more importantly, is this not what God did in Jesus Christ? God came down to talk to man, not as a detached, isolated, and majestic God, but as a man. This was the supreme instance of the Hebrew concept for mercy, was the coming of Jesus the Christ. Therefore, blessed is the man who can get inside his neighbor to see with their eyes, feel with their feelings. For he who does that will find others will do the same for him. He will do the same for us. Remember, this is what God did for us in Jesus the Christ. Next one up. Blessed are the poor of heart, for they shall see God. What does that mean? Anybody want to take a gather? This is a reminder that just as by God's grace, we keep our hearts clean, but by our human lust, we soil them. It's very seldom that we do our finest acts without some kind of, or without absolutely mixed motives, whether we realize it or not. We might give generously to a good cause, and then we might think, wow, look what I did. Or wow, I got a thank you note for that big check I wrote. That's a mixed motive. If we give service, are we doing it for the service, or are we doing it to put ourselves on display? Barclay put it better this way. Blessed is the man whose motives are absolutely pure and not mixed, for that man will someday be able to see God. Next to last, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. The other interpretation we saw, they shall be called the children of God. Both are pretty much the same. But what doesn't this one say? What isn't in there? It doesn't say, blessed are the peace lovers. Think about it. This one is an action term. Blessed are the makers, not the lovers. This is an action item. The peace doesn't come from the evasion of issues. By stepping aside and saying, oh, I'm not getting involved, I'm going to be peaceful. It comes from facing issues, dealing with them, and conquering them. It comes from those who make this world a better place for all men to live in. Back in Jesus' time, Jewish rabbis held that the highest task a man could perform, the best he can do, was to establish right relationships between men, between man and man. It has been said, the man who divides men is doing the devil's work, but the man who unites is doing God's work. So blessed are those who produce right relationships between man and man, for they are doing a godlike work. This is the best part. Last one. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you, continuing on, when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, as it was for the prophets who were persecuted before you. No language issues here. That one's pretty straightforward. But what the message to us nowadays is the degree and type of persecution versus then. Back then, you got stoned to death, thrown off the cliff, whatever. Remember, Jesus was always brutally honest with his followers that this was not an easy path. There are consequences to doing the right thing. Now, it's not likely that death awaits any of us due to our faith, especially in this country. But we may face consequences at work, in our social life. We may be mocked as practicing Christians, especially for the act of forgiveness, of turning the other cheek. People may ridicule you for that, like, why don't you get him while he's down? You've got the upper hand. But that's not what a Christian is supposed to do. Second thing to remember out of this, none of those who went before us, the prophets, none of us ever suffers alone. It has been said, Christ will be nearer to him who suffers than at any other time in that person's life. It has also been said, when a man has to suffer something for his faith, that is the way to the closest possible companionship with Christ. Now, as I mentioned in my email, the lectionary almost always pairs Micah 6 with Matthew 1 through 12 because they both contain the same bottom line, the same message. What is being taught here is what's important in terms of the kingdom of God living is what emerges from inside our hearts. We know that God, through Jesus Christ, already lavished on us all the grace we would ever need to be changed inside and go to heaven. Also, we are also to let the outside world show how we are loved by how we live. How we shop, eat, talk about one another is what matters in life. Both teaching end up with the same punchline. What is required is to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. All action terms. To do this is not a one-and-done single act to be checked off your life list and left behind. The life of faith is indeed a walk that reorients our heart and our life. Notice Micah doesn't say anywhere to stop your religious practices, even though they're remote. The problem is not religious itself. The problem is using the ritual practice, i.e. Sunday here, to excuse ourselves from the divine demands of justice and mercy the rest of the week. Equally opposite is excusing ourselves from a community of prayer and worship on the grounds of social justice. Either extreme fails. Basically, to put it in common language, come Sunday, talk the talk, but the rest of the week, walk the walk. That is the message from both of these readings today, Micah in particular, and the entire New Testament from Jesus the Christ. Amen.